Thanks to the three of you for joining us. We have Hope Andrade, Chairwoman of VIA Metropolitan Transit Board, Ray Lopez, State Representative, former City Councilman, and you're a co-chair, right? Right? And Jeff Hart, President and CEO of VIA. So, and of course, you both know Carrie Clack and Gloria Padilla. So we're here to hear you all and help, listen to you make the case for the sales tax shift from Aquifer to first workforce and then obviously transit. You're here to talk about transit. So tell us about what, how these sales tax dollars are going to be used and why this is so important to VIA. Or I guess maybe why it's so important to the community.
Exactly. Well, let me kind of start off. Obviously, you kind of give the organizational structure there. Hope and I are co-chairs, and of course, Jeff has all the ins and outs of any of the questions that you may be asking. But let me just quickly start off with, I don't know that I need a whole long introduction of me. I've been involved in the community, and this is the first time I've ever virtually done an editorial board review, but I've been in certainly in editorial boards on a variation of topics across the spectrum in my days in public office, from school board to the like. A lot of the work that I did, I guess you guys know, had to do with transportation at the city level. I served on the MPO and then into SANCO, the San Antonio Mobility Coalition. And I think that experience over the many, many years has done nothing more than underscore transit and the need for transit in our community, particularly an effective, well-funded transit, which we don't have, unfortunately. We have an effective transit, but it's not well-funded. Over the course of the next few weeks, I guess we're going to have an opportunity to talk about those kinds of things. And I think it's important that we underscore the efficiency that VIA has had over the course of the last decade with a very limited amount of money. And we can take that literally to the bank, knowing that they've done so well with a limited amount of money. If we were to be able to shift those dollars over to VIA, that they will continue that efficiency. And of course, they only do that because they have great leaders like Jeff and Hope and others on the board that are very, very interested in making sure that essential workers have a transit opportunity to continue moving forward. I'll kind of turn it over to Hope and let her make a few comments, and then maybe Jeff can take us down a little bit more of a detailed explanation of what we're hoping to get done and do some Q&A.
Well, thank you, Ray. Thank you so much for co-chairing this. I'm enjoying working with you as we've done for many years in transportation. But Josh, thank you, and to Gloria and Gary, thank you so much for your time and for your interest in VIA's future. You've heard the story about VIA being underfunded and for the past 40 years, and how Dallas and Houston and Austin have taken advantage of their full cent and get to do so much more than we do. And all due respect to the staff, they've done an excellent job with the half cent that we get. But the board felt this was an opportunity for us. Here's a 1/8 cent sales tax that's going to be available in 2021 that is expiring. We're not taking it away. It's expiring and it's available. So we took advantage of it. This is our opportunity for VIA to finally reverse that statement that says VIA has been underfunded for the past 40 years. And we've been limited into what we can do. So with this opportunity, and we're asking the voters to approve the reallocation, redistribution of that 1/8 cent that will be available so that we can fund our Keep SA Moving plan, which is a plan that will take us into the future. People will always ask why these other cities do so much more. And we try explaining that we're limited. We don't know why 40 years ago, our city leadership decided not to take advantage of the full cent, but they didn't. And so we can't go back. We can only go forward. And we believe that if we do a good job, and thank you for helping us share this message in our community, is that the voters will understand how important VIA's role is in this community. We take those essential workers to work each and every day. We take students like the young lady that we heard recently from the Young Women Leadership Academy, that 35% of those girls take the bus to go to school there. You know, I was one of those kids that took the bus to go to school. And then we hear about a restaurant worker that gets out at 11 o'clock at night and takes 2 hours to get home. With this new funding, we're going to increase frequency. And I'm not going to take Jeff's telling away but it's exciting to see of the transit system that we will be with this funding. And keep in mind another thing, for VIA, this sales tax revenue is our only source of revenue. We cannot access any other revenue. This is it. And so for the board to be able to say, you know, we're going to leave it better than when we first came in, we're so excited that we can do that. And we're asking our voters to support and believe that that public transit in this community is good for everyone, not just for the people that use it. So Jeff, I'll turn it over and you can tell about all the exciting things and Keep SA Moving plan if it's okay with you, Josh.
Okay. Well, first of all, Josh, good to see you. Gloria. What I'll say is that Keep SA Moving is the third verse of the same transit song that started 5 or 6 years ago with Vision 2040. Vision 2040 was a 25-year plan, and it was built on 3 legs: better bus, rapid transit, and innovative solutions. That was straight out of the plan back in 2015. It was pretty much a half-cent plus additional funding plan. It would require to implement that plan, at least in starters in the rapid transit corridors. It was going to take a half a cent or more in addition to the current funding. So it was a longer range plan, a 2040 plan. We then turned that into a VIA Reimagined plan, which was really far more financially constrained to being a 1/8 cent plus additional funding type plan. And there were 3 legs to that. And let's see if they don't sound familiar. Better bus, rapid transit, and smart transit. So the only change was renaming innovative solutions to smart transit. All the concepts were the same. Keep San Antonio Moving is a 1/8 cent plan, and it has the very same 3 legs: better bus, advanced rapid transit, and smart transit, the very same legs. If you take a look at what we can do, it's really, the plan is the same, it's just how much you can do based upon the financial circumstances. So Keep San Antonio Moving is a plan that's about 25% of Vision 2040, right? If you think that Vision 2040 was a half-cent plus plan, and this is an 1/8 cent, we're going to do about 25% of Vision 2040, which means pieces of, entering into pieces of. So let me talk to you about what we do with the 1/8 cent. And I'll start with the better bus side. And again, you're going to say, well, that sounds pretty much the same, because it is. Frequency, frequency, frequency. Remember, we've talked about frequency being important. So with respect to the bus system, we're going to focus frequency on the heavily traveled corridors. And of course, that results in shorter wait times, shorter travel times, more convenient travel for anybody, transfers for anybody who takes the system. We've shown that when we increase frequency that we get response. The city's $10 million annual investment resulted in big ridership increases along many of the routes that we increased frequency on. So we've shown that frequency does matter and frequency does yield results. It's not just speculation. With our plan, with our Keep SA Moving plan, about 42% more people will have access to 15-minute frequency or better. So that's a big movement. And in fact, we will have no 60-minute service in the peaks by 2027, no 60-minute. And during the midday, we're going to go from what used to be 44% of the service being at 60 minutes to 3% of the service being at 60 minutes. And frankly, with 3% of the service being at 60 minutes, we will do our best to get rid of that too, because I'd really like to have no service any less frequent than 30 minutes. There's no reason we can't do that. And then again, as we've said, better bus also involves broadening the span of service, finding ways to serve later night service. As Chair Andrade mentioned, the young man who gets off at a restaurant in Southtown has to walk from Southtown into downtown at 11:30 at night in order to get a bus. The bus takes him to North Star, and then he walks 2 miles to get home. And that's not a very amenable arrangement. So we'll expand service, we'll expand weekend coverage, because we know that the majority of our riders ride us to get to work, and we know the majority of them are riding at least one weekend day. So we know that that's important for our passengers. That's Better Bus, and I don't think you heard anything there that's unusual or strangely different, right? This portion is expanding mobility options, which has been part of smart transit. And so there are two big elements of expanding mobility options. The first are increasing the use of mobility on demand that we successfully piloted on the northeast side of San Antonio. In our plan, we will introduce at least 15, maybe as many as 20 additional zones like that. Those zones will do two things. First of all, they'll replace some of the hourly service. That's one of the ways that we don't run hourly service. They're going to replace hourly service. A lot of the 600 series routes, the circulator routes, will replace those with mobility on demand. And then we'll also use that to expand service to areas that VIA currently does not provide any service to. And in fact, we'll increase the area in which we provide service by about a third. And why that's probably extra important is that persons with disabilities will no longer have to find their way into our system in order to ride Via Trans. They will have that transport. So we're going to greatly expand the area in which persons with disabilities also have services by about a third. That's the first thing. The second thing is within innovation zones, and we're using the city's 3 innovation zones and adding one of our own. So those are the Medical Center, Brooks, Downtown, and Port San Antonio. We will be introducing first and last mile type solutions and circulator type solutions. So you get to a transit center and you'll be able to get to from that transit center to employment, or in the medical center to medical services through this kind of first last mile solution. It could be an autonomous shuttle, lots of opportunities, but so I consider that almost like activity center MOD. But we're not removing bus service, we're augmenting bus service with those kinds of services. By the time we expand all that service, increase that frequency, we'll have 92% of the jobs in Bexar County within a half mile of a bus route. So that's a lot of opportunity, 92% of jobs. Now the last piece, and Josh, I think maybe the one that might be of most interest to you, is the capital and technology investment side. And that's where we have really 4 elements. But I'll start with the more interesting one, which is ART. Everyone says, what's happening with ART? Has it disappeared? No, it has not. ART, we will continue in the planning work that's necessary for us to pursue federal funding. And we have that funding through the MPO. So that's going on right now. If we have additional funding, we believe that we could, with that additional funding, implement at least one ART corridor. And if we can receive capital funding through other sources beyond the federal government, because we're counting a federal government. So if we could find additional capital partners, we could expand the number of ART corridors. Now, ART is important from a service perspective because ART increases speed and reliability. And so it opens up job markets within a reasonable travel time for a larger number of people. So ART we will continue to pursue. We particularly want to be prepared in the case that if there are changes at the Federal Transit Administration, where the local share for smaller projects, and ours would be a smaller project compared to many across the nation, for smaller projects would get larger percent capital funding through the federal government and lower requirements on the local side. We want to be prepared to do that. We want to be, as I say, shovel ready for those kinds of projects. The second piece, which is about to premiere on I-10 at the far northern end of I-10 or western end, is the HOV or high occupancy vehicle system that we are doing in concert with TxDOT. So the first 2 lanes are essentially from County Line to 1604 on both I-10 and on 281. And our Stone Oak Park and Ride was specifically designed to feed into that lane on 281. And then we continue to work with TxDOT to try and bring those lanes further in, closer into downtown. We know, again, based upon experiences elsewhere, that those are the kinds of things, speed, reliability, and that always results in frequency because the demand is so high, that commuter service will be expanded. The third thing in that area are the development of mobility hubs. And so you've heard about high frequency corridor transit bus service, and you've heard about our MODs, and our first last mile solutions. And there has to be a point that ties them together, right? And so that's what a mobility hub is. It's where, and many of the mobility hubs are going to be at existing facilities like the Brooks Transit Center or the Medical Center Transit Center, those kinds of things. But that's where we kind of tie the system together and make it very convenient. And we have amenities at that location for the customers. And then the final thing is an integrated app that virtually does that as well. So you can plan your service. We'd like to plan it even beyond simply those products, if you will, that VIA offers, so that one could schedule for a scooter, schedule for an Uber or a Lyft or whatever other services are out there. So those are the 4 elements. Now, if that sounds a lot like our old rapid transit, smart transit, that's because, again, this plan is based upon that foundation that was established, frankly, back in 2015, was maintained through VIA Reimagine and continues with Keep SA Moving.
Let me just reflect back to you. So with additional sales tax funding, you would increase frequency of bus service, particularly with an emphasis on high occupancy, high use corridors.
Yes.
You would expand mobility on demand to like 15 to 20 zones around the county. You would continue prioritizing advanced rapid transit corridor, recognizing that the sales tax doesn't shift over to 2025, right? If I remember correctly, 2025 is the year.
January 1st, 2026.
Right.
January 1st, right.
2026 is when you all get it.
Yes.
So, but you could do the planning now and apply for, you can show that you have a dedicated funding source and apply for federal dollars. And I would assume that, would that first line be the north-south line that Henry C. was talking about, 5 or 6 months ago?
I think we would, I think historically that has tended to emerge as the first line. But I think obviously, clearly there would be continuing input. We are continuing the planning for both the north-south and the east-west line, so we're prepared. Josh, let me pick up on something you just said too, which is important. Because I've been asked, well, why are they concerned about funding they don't get until 2026? And one of the reasons that we benefit, at least by having that dedicated funding, exactly as you said, is that as we apply for federal grants for ART, we have to be able to assure the federal government that we have the dollars to operate that service when that line opens. And historically, FTA has taken the position, not do you have to be able to show you do it, but you have to show you have the kind of the cash in hand. But they have begun moving toward, if you can show us that you have dedicated funding at that point, then we will consider your grant application as though you are funded at that point. So having that, if you will, guarantee or assurance that that funding is in place provides us the opportunity to move forward with the FTA on an ART line, as opposed to having to wait far longer until we do have other funds assured.
How much funding would this generate a year for VIA?
I'm sorry?
How much funding would this generate a year for VIA?
In current estimate is like 38.5 million.
That's 38.5 million from the sales tax, but then you all would lose 10 million from general fund in the city once that happens. Is that?
Well, for the next 5 years, the city is committed that 10 million.
Right. But then once the sales tax switches over, so then is the net 28.5 million, or is the net?
Our plan is built on maintaining that 10 million. I'll just tell you that.
Okay. So once the sales tax shifts over, you are going to scrap it out for the $10 million from the general fund to continue.
Yes.
And then I'll stop asking questions here, but just since I'm not on mute, at one time, VIA was pushing very aggressively to have the sales tax shift over in 2021. Obviously, there's a compromise with the mayor on workforce development. Why is it? I mean, if the funding was urgent, then why can it be put off for 4 years now?
I'm going to defer that to Hope.
Well, Jeff, I'll ask you to chime in. That was a compromise that we had as you recall, our efforts the whole time were trying to find a compromise where we could all work together. And so the mayor's training program was brought up because of the pandemic. I mean, you know, we have 154,000 new unemployment claims, and we needed to get our city back on a recovery plan. And training was one of those, I guess, initiatives in the recovery plan that he felt were important for the city. You know, we met as a board and staff and saw where we could work within our budget to wait as long as we knew that money was definitely coming. As Jeff said, as long as we can prove that we have a viable revenue source, we can plan, we can access federal funding if it's available. I like to always remind the staff that we need to have a shovel-ready project for whenever there's funding available, that we take advantage of it. So yes, we did make, Josh, we did make that agreement with the city to have them access those dollars for the first 4 years to train and help in our economic recovery.
And what about Aquifer Protection? Because we get letters every day from Aquifer, people who support Aquifer Protection, who are very unhappy about this idea of shifting sales tax dollars from that program to the bus service and to transit and to workforce development. So how do you respond to people who say, why are we undermining a popular program? Why are we inviting potential disaster for if our main source of drinking water is contaminated? You know, there's clearly a very vocal group of people that are upset about this.
And we remind them that we didn't take that tax away; it was expiring. I believe a couple of council meetings ago, City Council is working on funding for the Edwards Aquifer Protection to continue it, and I believe that there is still a plan to move forward with funding them, but it's not part of the 1/8 cent sales tax. The priorities changed, and they benefited for 15 years and have done an excellent job. And the city will continue to fund them. But now, for VIA, we felt like it's time to take back those sales tax dollars to transit where it belonged. I mean, the whole time it was the only source of revenue that the legislature gave us for transit.
If voters approve this, could the sales tax ever be taken away from VIA? Could voters at a future date unapprove it, I guess, or shift that sales tax to a different source?
No.
Once it's approved.
I will defer to legal counsel, but I've never seen that. And once it's voted on, and look, Dallas and Houston and Austin have benefited for years. I think people will see the difference between our transit system that was underfunded and a transit system that will be funded properly. You'll see that. And like I said, this is public transit is okay. Think of it this way. Imagine San Antonio without a public transit system. Imagine how are our restaurant workers, our healthcare workers, service industry, how are they going to get to work if they have no other option? Can you imagine the stress, especially during what's going on right now where people have lost their jobs, to think that they don't even have a method to get to work? It's good for the community. It's good for the community to be competitive when businesses come to look at our city. I worked in economic development, and one of the questions that was brought up is people would ask about the public transit system. In fact, Jeff and I, when I came back to VIA, one of the meetings that he called me in during a very difficult time in my life to come meet with this company that was looking at San Antonio, and they wanted to know about the public transit system. So that is an important item in decision making when people relocate their businesses to San Antonio. But Jeff, I also want you to address the VIA Trans, how with this new funding, we're also going to be able to bring in some of the innovation to VIA Trans. And keep in mind that VIA Trans does take people to their medical appointments and sometimes is the only source also of transportation for them. But as one of our trustees, Trustee Malone, reminds us, Via Trans also takes them to work, takes our riders to work. So we need to keep that in mind. So talk about that, and also talk about the great partnerships that we have with employers.
So first of all, with respect to Via Trans, I mean, and what Hope you just said is absolutely true, because what we saw was many of the work locations closed down during the pandemic. And as a result, Via Trans ridership really contracted. And so what happened in Via Trans only reinforced the fact that so many of the Via Trans customers we carry are going to places of employment like Lighthouse for the Blind, for example. And so we saw that. We know how important it is. Now, I'm pretty proud actually of what we've done technologically with Via Trans already, so I have to start there. We introduced a service in Via Trans where on your phone or on your computer, you can now book your own trips, so you don't have to wait through a reservation system. It will obviously allow you to still make reservations or refer you to reservations, but you can make them. You can cancel a trip 24/7. Again, you don't have to wait and call in. But probably most importantly, you know, Via Trans customers are given a time, a pickup time, and they're told that that pickup time really represents a window which starts 10 minutes early and goes 20 minutes after. So it's a half-hour window in which we're committing to pick you up. But we want you to be available during that half-hour window. So of course, historically, it's been, well, I have to be ready at 9 o'clock for my 9:10 trip, even though it may not be until 9:20. And what we've introduced now, much as Uber and Lyft do, is our app will allow you to actually track your vehicle as it's arriving. So you can stay in your home or wherever it is where it's air conditioned, hopefully during these days, and watch as your vehicle arrives and not actually present yourself for service until it's pulling up. You know exactly what's going on there. With this plan, we further expand, as I mentioned, Via Trans type service, accessible type services in those MOD areas where currently people have, frankly, no access to any form of transit. And those persons with disabilities have no access to Via Trans unless they get themselves into the service area some way. So it's really a great expansion of that service. And then with respect to employers, we have a program called Via Works, and we will work with employers to help them find ways, but whether it's on transit or we have a van pool program. We actually subsidize van pools. We want to include carpooling as an option through the MPO's matching program. But we'll sit down with them and customize plans with employers to help them find ways to get their employees to work. And I will say Bexar County has been one of the biggest frontline, folks that we've worked with. And at Bexar County, all their employees, their badge serves as a transit pass because Bexar County is effectively paying for their fares through a program with us. And then maybe the biggest program we have, is the University Pass program, where universities, for something like $5 a head a year, everybody within the university, and in most cases it includes staff, again, ride transit for free. And so the University Pass program makes, when we think about a lot of this workforce development and education program that the city is proposing for that first 5-year period, is going to be based upon education, and we will be able to provide that kind of service for them. And then right now we have a program that's called Workforce Assistance Program. And so if a person is unemployed, we will give them a monthly pass for up to 3 months. And actually we've just extended that. We were going to end it at the end of August, and we extended now through the end of the calendar year. So that's another way in which we're working with the community to make our service affordable. And of course, our fare already starts pretty affordable.
So I had a question regarding fares. Can you explain a little bit about the role that fares play in your funding?
Fares represent 8 to 10% of the cost of service. So our funding, about 77% of our funding is the sales tax. It's the largest chunk by far. About, let's say, 10% is fares, and the remainder is our federal formula grant. That's what we get on a regular basis. The dollars we get from the city, and then some incidental dollars associated with advertising and those kinds of things. But the lion's share is sales tax.
How do our fares rate against other major urban areas in Texas?
In Texas, Texas fares tend to be lower. I'll start with that because of the sales tax funding, right? And so our fares are pretty comparable to Austin and Houston. We have lower pass fares. Like if you buy a monthly pass here, I think we have the lowest monthly pass fare. The city of Dallas, or I should say DART, the transit system in Dallas, their fares are about double ours. We're at about $1.30 just as a standard boarding. I believe they're at $2.50. So they're substantially higher. Of course, they also have the nation's largest light rail system. So I guess, all of that kind of comes into balance in some way.
How has ridership been during the last 5 months?
We have been varying between 45% to 50% lower than on an average weekday a year ago. And certainly, I think it shows a story in two ways, frankly. At the point in which only essential trips were to be made, essential workers getting to work, or people who needed essential services like getting to a doctor or getting to a grocery store, that's what the 50 to 55% of riders that we maintained were doing. And we got emails and calls throughout that period about, I work at Walmart and this is the only way I had to get there. Thank you for keeping the buses running. Or I need to get groceries and the only way I get to the grocery store is on VIA. Thank you for keeping the buses running. So that's the first side. The second side is that, as our chair mentioned, a lot of our ridership is tied up in the service industry, which means two things. Number one is they can't work from home, right? And so as those services return, as those, like the hotels reopen, the restaurants reopen, as those things come back to life, those riders are very, very, very likely to resume riding. That's the first thing. On the other hand, they also have seen the most severe number of furloughs and layoffs. As you see, the hotels are having, unfortunately, to lay off large numbers of people. And so there's that big segment of our ridership that is not riding because right now they don't have a job to ride to, unfortunately.
Totally random question, but the other day I was driving around and I actually saw one of your trucks hosing down a bus bench. Are y'all doing that throughout the county or throughout the city?
Oh, we do that all the time. Yeah, that's standard operating procedure.
Okay, I had never seen that, so
Oh, okay.
It was interesting.
We tend to try and do it at night more so when it's less likely there'll be people there.
Okay.
Although in weather like this, it might be refreshing, right?
I have a question about the campaign itself. We're 2 months away, and are you deploying any more resources to areas, to parts of town where people aren't that dependent upon the bus, may care more about the aquifer, and just may have, frankly, some antipathy about this proposal?
That's a great question. Yes, we are addressing some of those districts that don't necessarily use VIA services, but we're trying to help them understand the role that VIA plays. And, many of my friends will say, well, I don't use VIA. I don't need VIA. And I say, do you realize that with 1 million more people moving to San Antonio by 2040, that means more cars on the road. If we have a more efficient transit system where people will think about, those that do not use VIA now will think about using VIA, it's a great improvement. When Jeff mentioned the HOV lanes, think about it. You're stuck on 281 and all of a sudden the bus comes by, drives by quickly because they're on an HOV lane, air conditioned, people are working, just like we see in movies, where people are using public transit and they're working on their computer or on their phone because we have Wi-Fi, you're going to reconsider. If you don't need your car that day to go different places, you may reconsider. So we're trying to help our congestion. It's not the only solution for addressing congestion, but it is an option that people can have. So yes, we're trying to help people understand that VIA is an essential service to this community, and that it is good for the community as a whole, not just for the people that use it, but for our community as a whole. Ray, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, no, I think you covered all the points that we've always kind of known. There are a lot of folks that will take that position. So, well, I really don't use it, but I don't think it takes a lot of debate to get them to realize that there is a lot of community benefit. I can tell you that in my district, the northwest part of town, where the majority of the growth is happening, people recognize that by virtue of having a mass transit strategy, it will alleviate congestion on like 151, Highway 16 or Bandera Road, all of those corridors that are getting people not necessarily into town, but getting them from, let's say, the Alamo Ranch area into the Ingram area. They want to be able to have, some level of relief and quickly recognize that by applying mass transit options, it will give a percentage of relief to those folks that are still getting in their cars and driving. The reality of it is, I think it doesn't take much for people to realize, hey, we've got a traffic problem. Oh, by the way, it's only going to get worse. Jeff spoke a while ago about the 2040 plan and all of these long-term plans that are predicting traffic growth. And we've been predicting these for a decade. The good is that we've been predicting for a decade. The bad is that we're right on. The growth is coming. There's no question that the congestion is maybe even accelerated to some point. So we know that the traffic is coming. We also know, the community also knows that it is not going to get better. It's only going to get worse with the number of folks moving to San Antonio. It's a two-edged sword. We love people come to San Antonio, bringing their economies, bringing their enthusiasm for our community. But what they don't bring is their roads from wherever they come from. That stays behind, and we're left with the fact of having to deal with transit issues. I think the case is easy to be made. I certainly have had those discussions with a lot of the HOAs, and you talked about the outreach. I mean, that we continue to do the same outreach we've always done, communicating at the grassroots level with HOAs, using both English and Spanish outlets. And today, the evolution of online, right? Facebook, all of the electronic media that we're using, getting the message out. I think people are ready to have that kind of a dialogue, and we're ready to listen.
And if I can say, the Vote Yes for Transit campaign, it's a coalition of working San Antonians, neighborhood organizations, neighborhood leaders, community advocates, and business owners. So we've got a very active campaign team that is committed and understands the role of VIA. I don't want to personalize this, but this is my third time I returned to VIA. I served on the Transportation Commission, and it's all about highways and making sure that we have an efficient transportation system. But I also, during my time on the commission, I was a champion for rural transit because we didn't want anyone stuck. And we knew the importance that public transit plays in our state. So I brought back what I learned to San Antonio. I'm born and raised here. I love my community. I appreciate the opportunities that it's given me. And this is one area that I've stayed focused on, because if we can leave it with a viable source of revenue, where we will stop saying that we're underfunded and that we can't do this and we can't do that, and we look at VIA as only a system for those that can't afford another source of system, I will feel like we've done our job for not just VIA, but for the city of San Antonio.
Jeff, just briefly on the ART line that would be under development or planning, that would be bus rapid transit or trackless train. Obviously, that wouldn't be a rail
Correct.
project.
Oh, no, it would not. It would be trackless
And then,
train or some form of advanced bus rapid transit.
and then not really a sales tax related question or anything like that, but just since we have you here, in terms of COVID and the bus system, what do we know about drivers, contracting COVID or spread among passengers? I know VIA took a lot of steps in terms of mitigation. Obviously, numbers are low right now, but what have we seen from the data?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, and I've asked this question several times, there hasn't been any contact tracing that brought something back to the bus system. I'll start there. We have had operators, we've had mechanics, and we've had administrative staff that have contracted COVID. In some of those cases, had someone in their home that had COVID, for example. So even that, we can't necessarily track back to the fact that that operator was on a bus. And clearly, we had people that were working from home for several months that contracted COVID that weren't in a public person-facing position. So people have contracted COVID, employees have contracted COVID for probably a large variety of reasons. Now, our drivers, as you mentioned, we've taken a lot of steps to protect the drivers and the passengers, including like I call it the shower curtain that we're now replacing with a more permanent plexiglass solution, and wiping down the surfaces, taking the temperature of the driver every day as they come into the facility, keeping social distancing even in their report area, all those kinds of steps to keep them safe. But so we have yet to have anything that I could say, oh, it appears that this does track back to someone on a bus having given someone else or a driver or another employee, having exposed them even to COVID. None of that has tracked back. And our safety department has gone through the state COVID tracking process. So when they do the tracking internally, they're using that formal process.
Thanks. I was just curious. We've met so many times about this. I don't know if I have any other questions about the voting yes for transit, about the campaign or the initiative. Carrie, Gloria, do you have any other questions? We're good. You all are off the hot seat. Unless there's any final closing comments you want to make.
I just want to say thank you. Your readers will pay attention to this, and we thank you for the time. And I commit to you that we will all be excited after November 3rd and start planning, and you'll hear at our board meetings presentations on what the staff is working on. When the stars are all aligned, when you've got the best team led by Jeff Arndt and many engineers that we sit down and we hear what they're planning for, it's the right time for VIA. And it's the right time for San Antonio to understand how important VIA is in the future and the economic recovery for San Antonio. Ray, do you want to say anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. I just echo the comments that you just made, and thank everyone for participating in this to get that message out. I think at the end of the day, I think we're all recognizing and taking action on a fact that says, that a single source funding approach to anything, whether it's transit or any of the other, municipal solutions that we need, those days are over. So it's going to take a lot of different facets of funding, whether it's at the state, the city, the county level, or the federal level. I can tell you that, we've tried on several occasions to generate additional dollars at the state level by virtue of registration fees and things of that nature. Those have been difficult to get moved forward, and they'll probably continue to be even more difficult now because of the pandemic and the budget shortfalls at the state level. So it's important that we recognize those agencies like VIA that are doing a very good job, a very efficient a job of using the dollars that they're given, and then looking in every single corner to try to generate as much money as possible so we can keep essential services like VIA's transit system moving forward. So I'm looking forward to this fast-paced campaign. It is going to be quick and fast, but we're up to the task.
Well, Ray, just since we have you here and you are in the legislature, if Democrats make gains in the House, in the state House, is there Is there any opportunity there for, you know, raising the gas tax to fund transit and transportation, for boosting the sales tax, for, you know, registration fees? I mean, I guess no lawmaker wants to be tied to a tax increase.
Well, no lawmaker does, but anybody that's in governance and sets the politics aside needs to recognize that the reality of things is we've got to find funding sources to be able to make improvements in our community. I can tell you that last year, you probably know this, last year I introduced a gas tax, or an adjustment on the 20 cents that was tied to a consumer price index levy. I was able to get it into committee. I did get a chance to present it at in Ways and Means. It didn't go any further than the first hearing. And I spoke with the chairman afterwards, who happens to sit on the other side of the aisle. And he said, you know, people have talked about this kind of stuff a lot. It's just not, you know, we on our side of the aisle are just not going to move those kinds of things forward. As practical as it sounds, that's not what we're not here to do that. So I think that they realize, even on the other side of the aisle, whether we take control or not, whether we get the 9 seats or not, there's a realization that there are funding mechanisms out there that we can adjust. I can tell you, without getting into a whole editorial session on the gasoline tax, for example, a simple CPI appropriations on the gasoline tax on the 20 cents will generate over a 5-year period right at $1 billion. That's a significant amount of money, particularly when you say, listen, 75% of those dollars will go to transportation. It'll go to fund streets and projects and NPO priorities like Highway 16 that my community wants. Also shifting 25% of those dollars over, increasing those dollars that will go to education. Remember, of that, it's a 75-25 split between transportation and education. So there's a lot of merit to doing it. I would suggest, I do believe that that there's a change perhaps afoot, democratically driven, to maybe take the House. But even if we don't do that, there are enough individuals that recognize that in a shortfall of $4.8 billion shortfall at the state level, we're going to have to look for revenue sources. I can tell you that it's an easy argument in my mind to make with someone on the other side of the aisle and say, what revenue source can you get behind? You want to try gambling? Do you want to try marijuana? Oh, by the way, not try marijuana. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Or do you feel more
People might
confident?
want to try marijuana.
You feel more confident going after an adjustment on an existing 20-cent tax. And I can tell you that in most cases, they'll go, any tax is bad. My side of the aisle, they'll say, doesn't want to pursue any of that. But a gasoline tax makes so much sense to pursue and could even politically be more acceptable to some folks. And I think we can make a very strong case. I am working right now to make sure that I try to get a small number on my legislation by virtue of introducing it early, in the November timeframe when the window opens for filing bills.
Who provided that $1 billion estimate over 5 years on the CPI adjustment? Is that
the Texas A&M Transportation Institute?
okay?
I've been working very, very closely with them, and we've taken a lot of different slices, to be honest with you, and maybe certainly an opportunity for a topic for another discussion down the road. But we've looked at it in various ways, of whether we just applied a CPI, or how would this look like if we added a penny, or maybe we do both or some combination of it. How do you go out, do an outreach within a 5-year term when you realize that the increase in non-gasoline vehicles is going to increase? I mean, how do you address those kinds of issues? Is it a registration? Is it a registration cost perhaps? Or is it, do you say, listen, because that's the direction we want, maybe it becomes an incentive to say, listen, you don't have to pay the increased CPI on the 20 cents a gallon if you go to a cellular car or a battery operated car or whatever. Maybe it could be used as an incentive. So there's a lot of dialogue around that. Right now, the basic formula that I'm working hard on to convince folks is CPI tied to construction costs, highway construction costs, levied on top of the 20 cents, would generate up about 900 and change, let's say right under $1 billion in a 5-year mark. 5 years out, who knows what those ratios are going to be. But even with the deployment of alternative fuels, the consumption continues to go up. Yeah, I don't see that revenue stream shrinking or going away drastically, because growth will absorb any of the migration. So we're looking forward to a good, robust dialogue.
All right. Thanks to all three of you for meeting with us.
Josh, can I add one more thing?
Oh, sure, of course.
One more acknowledgement that I must. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the strong leadership of the VIA Board of Trustees. They have just been amazing, and I'll tell you, the credit is due to them. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thanks to all three of you.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.